I still hear the judge's voice sometimes, echoing in the quiet of my little cabin, not the harsh, condemning tone I'd grown used to from white men, but the one that finally, miraculously, delivered the judgment. The clerk read it clearly. The jury fined for the said Elizabeth Freeman against the said John Ashley, and assessed damages in the sum of 30 shillings. 30 shillings, and my freedom I won. I, an enslaved black woman named Mum Bet, stood in that Berkshire County courtroom and sued my master, the powerful Colonel John Ashley, for my God-given liberty. And I won. Think about that for a minute. Was I mad? Was I foolish to challenge a man who owned my body, my labor, my very name? Tell me honestly, if you were me and you heard those words, all men are born free and equal, would you have dared to risk everything, even your life, for a dream written down in a book you weren't even supposed to hear? My life, before that moment, had been a tapestry woven from the coarse thread of servitude, stretching back further than I could truly remember. They called me Bet, or sometimes Mum Bet, though I preferred the name Elizabeth, the one I chose for myself later. I was born into slavery in the Dutch community of Claverick, New York, sometime around 1742. My earliest memories are of the chill of the earthen floor, the smell of wood smoke, and the constant backbreaking work. I had a sister, Lizzie, a shy, gentle soul, and our mother, whose face is now a beautiful, indistinct memory, a casualty of the brutal separation that defined our existence. We were property, passed from one owner to the next like a worn-out saddle or a dull plowshare. When I was just a girl, perhaps 7 or 8, I was sold with Lizzie to Colonel John Ashley of Sheffield, Massachusetts. This transfer from one kind of hell to another, marked the beginning of my time at the great barracks in a grand, intimidating house that became both my prison and, ironically, the stage for my eventual liberation. Colonel Ashley was a wealthy, prominent man in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He was a pillar of the community, a justice of the peace, and a leading figure in the town of Sheffield. His wife, Mrs. Hannah Ashley, was a formidable woman known for her temper and her unforgiving nature. The Ashley house was a hub of social and political activity. In the years leading up to the American Revolution, it served as a meeting place for the local patriots, men who would gather in the great parlor, their voices booming with talk of liberty, rights, and the tyranny of the crown. I was there, a silent shadow in the periphery, serving their rum and cleaning their spilled ink, my ears wide open, soaking up every word they carelessly tossed into the air. It was during these revolutionary years that the words began to take root in my soul. I remember one chilly evening, the fire crackling in the hearth illuminating the faces of these self-proclaimed revolutionaries. Colonel Ashley was presiding, and a young lawyer, I believe it was Theodore Sedgwick, though I didn't know his name then, was reading from a document they called the Sheffield Declaration. I was polishing the brass on the mantelpiece, pretending to be deaf to their conversation, but my heart was pounding out a rhythm to their words. They spoke of unalienable rights and declared that mankind in a state of nature are equal, free, and independent. Equal, free, and independent. They were talking about themselves, of course, about their freedom from England, but I was listening for me. Then came the year 1780, and the talk was all about the new Massachusetts Constitution. The Colonel's study became a constant buzz of legal jargon and political debate. One evening, the Colonel was reading the preamble aloud to a group of men, his voice filled with patriotic fervor, completely oblivious to the person standing behind the screen, mending his coat. I heard it, clear as a bell, undeniable, a bolt of lightning striking the very core of my enslaved existence. All men are born free and equal, he read, and have certain natural, essential, and unalienable rights, among which may be reckoned the right of enjoying and defending their lives and liberties, that of acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, in fine, that of seeking and obtaining their safety and happiness. I froze, the needle suspended in midair. All men, not all white men or all property-owning men, but all men. The Colonel, in his desire to demonstrate his commitment to this new republic, had unwittingly read the death warrant for his own claim on me. That night I couldn't sleep. The words repeated themselves in my mind. All men are born free and equal. My mind raced. If what they wrote was true, then how could I, a human being, be property? How could this very man who helped draft these noble words own me? The moment of decision came shortly thereafter, a visceral, terrifying flashpoint that sealed my resolve. Lizzie, my quiet sister, was a victim of Mrs. Ashley's volatile temper. I remember walking into the kitchen and seeing Mrs. Ashley, enraged over some trivial offense, raise a heated kitchen shovel, intending to strike Lizzie. Instinct, a sudden powerful surge of protectiveness, took over my body. I threw myself between my sister and my mistress. The shovel came down not on Lizzie's delicate skin but on my arm, leaving a deep, terrible scar that I carried for the rest of my life. I never tried to hide that scar. I often showed it. It was my testament, my proof of the brutality of the system they called slavery. In that moment, staring at the raw, burning wound, I knew I had to act. The scar became my constant reminder. I would not endure this another day. I sought out the young lawyer I remembered from the meetings, Theodore Sedgwick. He was a prominent attorney, sympathetic to the revolutionary cause, and I had seen a flicker of something decent in his eyes as he spoke of liberty. I walked the long, dusty road to his office. I didn't send a messenger. I went myself, dressed in my simple working clothes, my scar a silent accusation. I stood before him, a small, determined figure. And I didn't mince words, sir, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my knees. I have heard that the new Constitution says that all men are born equal, and that every man is entitled to liberty. I am not a dumb beast. I am a woman, a man's equal, and I am not willing to serve any longer. I want to sue my freedom. I expected him to laugh, to dismiss me, to tell me to go back to my master. Instead, he looked at me, his face thoughtful. He must have recognized the profound contradiction in the law, the glorious words of freedom on one page, and the continued bondage of human beings on the next. He agreed to take my case. He agreed, a white, influential lawyer, to argue on behalf of a single enslaved black woman against one of the most powerful men in the county. It was a staggering act of courage on his part. He enlisted the help of another lawyer, Tapping Reeve, and together they prepared my case. The lawsuit was filed in the Berkshire County Court of Common Pleas in August 1781. It was not just my case. It was joined with the case of another enslaved man named Brom, and the legal challenge was therefore titled Brom and FactVerse John Ashley. Sedgwick didn't argue that slavery was illegal, because there was no specific law against it in the colony. Instead, he argued that the new 1780 Massachusetts Constitution made it impossible to enforce slavery. The specific part of the Constitution, the part I had heard Colonel Ashley read, made his property claim invalid. The words themselves were our legal shield and sword. The town was abuzz. The audacity of it, a slave suing her master. People came from miles around to see the proceedings. I sat in that courtroom looking at Colonel Ashley, the man who owned me, and I saw the shock and disdain on his face. I felt the weight of every disapproving gaze, every whispered judgment, yet I held my head high. I was fighting for my right to be a person, not a thing. The trial, thankfully, was swift. The lawyers presented their arguments, and the jury, a group of local farmers and tradesmen, were forced to grapple with the grand, sweeping language of their new foundational law. Could they, in good conscience, uphold the Constitution while simultaneously denying freedom to a human being who stood before them? So that's the situation I was in. I, a woman who had spent her entire life in chains, was waiting for 12 white men to decide if the words they had enshrined in their law book truly applied to all men, or only to the men who looked like them. My heart was a drum in my chest, beating out a furious rhythm of hope and fear. If I lost, I could be subjected to even worse cruelty, perhaps even sold away from the only place I knew as home. If I won, I would not only be free but would have struck a monumental blow against the very idea of slavery in the whole state. Before I tell you what happened next, the decision that changed not only my life but the history of Massachusetts, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have gone to the lawyer? Would you have stayed silent, believing the risk was too great? Tell me what choice you would have made right then, knowing everything was on the line. The jury went out to deliberate, and the silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Every ticking moment felt like an hour. Finally, they returned. The foreman stood, and I fixed my eyes on him, trying to read the verdict in the slightest twitch of his expression. He announced the verdict. The jury fined for the said Elizabeth Freeman against the said John Ashley, and assessed damages in the sum of 30 shillings. I won. Brom and I both won. The jury had effectively ruled that the words of the Massachusetts Constitution must apply to everyone, regardless of color or status. They declared that Brom and I were not the property of Colonel Ashley. The 30 shillings, a small sum, was the financial redress for the labor he had unjustly extracted from me. Colonel Ashley was ordered to pay the damages and the court costs. He did appeal the verdict to the Supreme Judicial Court, but he dropped the appeal before it could be heard. Perhaps realizing the legal tide had decisively turned against him, the ruling in Brom and Bett versus Ashley was a landmark moment. It was the first time a court in Massachusetts had used the 1780 Constitution to declare an enslaved person free. The impact was immediate and profound. From that day forward, I was Elizabeth Freeman. No more Mum Bett, no more property. I had earned my name and my freedom. Colonel Ashley, in a final attempt to salvage my labor, actually asked me to return to his household as a paid servant. I looked at him, the man who had owned me, the man I had defeated in his own court, and I replied with a quiet firmness that surprised even myself. I told him, "Sir, if I have not been a good servant, I am willing to stay and finish out the year. But if I have been a good servant, you have nothing to fear. I shall not remain in your service one day longer than I choose." I chose not to stay. Instead, I went to work for the very man who had helped secure my liberty, Theodore Sedgwick. For the next 2 decades, I became a respected and valued member of his household in Stockbridge. I was a free woman, earning wages, saving my money, and raising my children in safety. I became known throughout the community as a skilled nurse and midwife, my reputation for herbal remedies and gentle care spreading far beyond the town limits. I never forgot my past. I used to tell my stories, pointing to the scar on my arm as evidence of the cruelty I had overcome. I never got rid of this mark, I would say, because I am better off to have been saved by it. My case, combined with a later, more comprehensive case known as Commonwealth versus Jennison, which involved the pursuit of an enslaved man named Quack Walker, set the unshakable legal precedent. The Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts, by affirming the principle that slavery was incompatible with the Constitution's declaration that all men are born free and equal, effectively abolished slavery in Massachusetts. It wasn't a legislative act. It was a judicial one, sparked by the courage of an enslaved woman who heard a promise and dared to demand it be kept. I was simply Elizabeth Freeman. But by standing up in that courtroom, I helped tear down the shackles for every enslaved person in my state. I lived out my days in freedom, a respected matriarch. I bought my own little house and I was buried in the Sedgwick family plot, a profound honor for a woman who began her life as a piece of property. My tombstone reads, Elizabeth Freeman, known by the name of Mum Bett. She was born a slave and could neither read nor write. Yet in her own sphere she had no superior or equal. She neither wasted time nor property. She never violated a trust nor failed to perform a duty. In every situation of domestic trial, she was the most efficient helper and the most tender friend. That epitaph, written by the family that loved and respected me, tells you everything about the aftermath of that victory. It wasn't just my freedom. It was my recognition as a fully formed, capable human being. My story is proof that freedom is not just given. It must often be taken, even if the only weapon you wield is the very law your oppressors wrote. I never considered myself a great historical figure, just a woman who heard a truth she could not unhear. My life was harsh, but my ending was defined by that single, courageous choice I made when I stood up and said, I want my freedom, if my story, the quiet, dramatic truth of a woman called Mum Bett who became Elizabeth Freeman, resonated with you. And if you believe that every person deserves to be treated as free and equal, then please like this video right now and help this story reach more people. Subscribe to my channel for more deep dive historical narratives of the forgotten heroes who changed the world. And don't forget to share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Tell me if you think the founders truly meant all men when they wrote it. I'll see you all in the next story.